You never really know someone until you have something they want, until you hold the key to their future in your hand and you watch what they're willing to do to get it. For 40 years, I built a life, a family, a fortune. I thought it was my legacy. I never dreamed it would become the weapon I'd use to expose the people I loved most. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about a lie so perfect, so devastating, that it shattered my world and then gave me the power to rebuild it from the ashes. And it all started with a simple, terrifying pain in my chest. If you've ever felt taken for granted, ever wondered if you're only loved for what you can provide, then you need to hear this story. Stick with me to the end, because the final twist is one I never saw coming. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this is a lesson in what truly matters. A story of how I orchestrated the most satisfying revenge by pretending to have nothing left to give. My name is Robert. For my entire adult life, I was the rock, the foundation upon which my family was built. I wasn't born into wealth. I built it with these two hands, starting with a small hardware store that I grew into a regional chain, Grant's Hardware. The name wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My wife, Clara, was by my side through every late night, every nail-biting loan application. She was the heart of our home, the warmth to my pragmatism. We had 2 children, Karen, our fiercely ambitious firstborn, and Brian, our easygoing, creative son. We gave them everything we never had: the best schools, the summer camps, the cars at 16. Clara always said, "We're building a different kind of life for them, Robert, a life without the struggle." I was proud of that. I saw my success not as a personal trophy, but as a shield protecting them from the hardships I'd endured. But Clara, cancer doesn't care about shields. It took her 5 years ago, and it took the heart of our family with her. The big house we'd filled with laughter became an echo chamber of my own footsteps. Karen, by then a high-flying corporate lawyer in the city, would call once a week with efficient bullet-point updates on her life. Brian, a talented but struggling graphic designer, visited more often, but there was a sadness in his eyes, a sense of drifting that I didn't know how to fix. The business continued to thrive under the management team I'd built, but my passion for it had dimmed with Clara's light. My purpose shifted from building an empire to simply maintaining it, waiting for the day I could hand it over to my children, a perfect, polished inheritance. Then the chest pains started. A tightness at first, like a band constricting whenever I walked up the stairs to the empty second floor. I dismissed it as age, as grief. But one evening, sitting alone in my study, a searing bolt shot through my left arm and up into my jaw. I sat there, clutching the arm of my leather chair, the portrait of Clara on the wall seeming to look at me with alarm. The fear was absolute, a cold certainty that this was it. I was going to die alone in this silent house. I managed to call my neighbor, Bill, a retired paramedic. He rushed over, took one look at me, and drove me to the emergency room. It wasn't a full heart attack, the doctor said, but a severe warning, a blockage. I needed a procedure, a stent, and I needed to drastically reduce my stress. Stress? I'd laughed, a hollow sound. I'm semi-retired. What stress? The doctor had given me a knowing look. Loneliness can be a stressor, Mr. Grant. And worry. What are you worried about? And that's when it hit me. I wasn't worried about myself. I was terrified for what I would leave behind. Not the money, but the people. Would Karen and Brian be okay? Would the fortune I'd built be a blessing or a curse? Would it bring them together or tear them apart? In that sterile hospital room, under the ghostly glow of the fluorescent lights, a dangerous, terrifying idea began to form. What if they didn't get the inheritance? What if there was nothing to fight over? What would be left? A week later, against my doctor's orders, I called a family meeting. I didn't tell them about the hospital. I simply said it was time to discuss the future. Karen arrived first, pulling up in her sleek German sedan, a picture of controlled efficiency in a tailored pantsuit. She kissed my cheek, her perfume a cloud of expensive citrus. "Everything all right, Dad? You sounded serious on the phone." Brian came an hour later, his old hatchback sputtering into the driveway. He wore a worn-out band t-shirt and carried a six-pack of craft beer. "Hey, Pops, got something to wash down the serious talk." We sat in the living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays. The air was thick with unspoken history. I took a deep breath. "Kids," I began, my voice rougher than I intended. "I'm getting older. The business is doing well, but it's time I started thinking about how to simplify things." Karen leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Are you talking about succession planning? Because I've been looking at the corporate structure, and there are some very efficient ways we can—" I held up a hand. "This isn't about the business. Not directly. It's about me. I'm not well." The change in the room was instantaneous. Brian's relaxed posture straightened. "What do you mean, not well? Dad?" "It's my heart," I said, the lie tasting like ash. I embellished the truth, making it sound more dire. "The doctor says it's fragile, very fragile. The stress of managing the estate, the assets, it's too much. I've decided—" I paused, letting the suspense build, watching their faces. Karen's was a mask of concern, but I saw the calculations going on behind her eyes. Brian just looked scared. "I've decided that it's all become too much. I'm going to start liquidating. The business, the investments. I'm going to cash out." Karen's jaw dropped. "Liquidate? Dad, that's insane. Grant's Hardware is your life's work. The value is in the long-term growth, not a fire sale." "It's not a fire sale," I said calmly. "It's a strategic wind-down. I'll use the money to cover my medical expenses and, well, to live comfortably for whatever time I have left." The silence was deafening. I could see the numbers scrolling behind Karen's eyes, the millions she had always assumed were her future, evaporating. "And us?" Brian asked quietly, his voice small. "What about, are you okay? What can we do?" Karen found her voice again. "Dad, listen, you don't need to do this. I can take over the management. We can hire a CEO. Liquidating is the worst possible financial decision. You'll be throwing away generations of wealth." "Generations of wealth I built," I said, an edge coming into my voice. "And it's my decision to unbuild it if that's what I need for peace." The meeting ended in a tense stalemate. Karen left in a fury, promising to send me financial models to prove I was being irrational. Brian stayed behind, helping me clean up the dinner dishes. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine worry. "It just seems so sudden." I placed a hand on his shoulder, a pang of guilt shooting through me. "Sometimes, son, you have to simplify to see what's really important." That was the first move. The bait was set. The next phase of my plan was the most difficult. I hired an actor, a dignified older gentleman named Mr. Albright, to play the part of a financial advisor. I staged a meeting at my house, ensuring both Karen and Brian were present. Mr. Albright, with his silver hair and grave demeanor, was perfect. He spread documents across my oak desk. "Robert, Karen, Brian," he began, his tone funereal. "I'm afraid the situation is more complex than we initially thought. The liquidity event, it did not yield the expected capital. There were significant tax implications, and several of the key investments had clauses that triggered substantial penalties upon early withdrawal." He looked at each of us in turn. "The long and short of it is that the estate is largely depleted. What remains will be enough to cover Robert's ongoing medical care and basic living expenses in a modest apartment. There will be no significant inheritance." The reaction was everything I feared and nothing I expected. Karen turned white. "Depleted? That's impossible. What about the commercial properties, the stock portfolio?" "Liquidated at a loss to cover the initial tax burden," Mr. Albright said smoothly. "I'm sorry." She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This is incompetence, criminal incompetence. I want to see every document, every transaction. I'm a lawyer, for God's sake. There has to be something we can do."
Brian just sat there, stunned. He looked from Mr. Albright to me, his eyes wide with confusion. "So you're broke?" he whispered. "Not broke," I said, leaning on the desk as if for support. "But the life insurance, your mother's, it's gone. What I built for you, it's gone. I'm so sorry." Karen didn't hear the apology. She was already on her phone, pacing the room, talking about forensic accountants and legal challenges. Brian came over and put a hand on my arm. "It's okay, Dad," he said, his voice thick. "We'll figure it out. You don't need to worry. You have us." In that moment, I almost broke. The love in his eyes was real, but I had to see it through. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in human nature. The news of my financial collapse acted like a chemical agent, revealing the true composition of my children's characters. Karen's visits, once monthly and efficient, became frantic, weekly audits. She would arrive with her laptop, demanding bank statements, questioning every minor expense. "This withdrawal for $200, Dad? What was that for? You need to be on a strict budget now." Her concern was a thin veneer over a boiling pot of resentment. She blamed me for my irresponsible decision to liquidate. She blamed Mr. Albright. She even muttered once that Mom would have never let this happen. The comment felt like a physical blow. She stopped talking about her life, her promotions, her new condo. The conversation was only about the money that was no longer there. The daughter I knew, the driven, brilliant woman, had been replaced by a stressed, sharp-tongued stranger who saw me not as her father, but a failed financial asset. Brian, on the other hand, became more present. He started coming over every weekend, but a change had come over him too. The easygoing artist was replaced by a man burdened by a new, grim practicality. He started talking about getting a real job, about putting his design dreams on hold. He'd bring over brochures for affordable senior living communities, his enthusiasm forced and heartbreaking.
Look, Dad, this one has a community garden. You always liked puttering around in the yard. He thought he was helping. He thought he was being the responsible one. But all I could see was his spirit being crushed by the weight of an obligation he should never have had to bear. He wasn't chasing the money. He was buckling under the perceived duty of caring for a broke and ailing father. His love was being poisoned by pity. The lowest point came on my birthday. Karen sent a text. "Happy birthday. Let's discuss long-term care insurance next week." Brian showed up with a sad-looking cupcake with a single candle. We sat in my dimming living room, and as I blew out the candle, I made a wish. I wished that I could turn back time and never have started this cruel experiment. The silence between us was a living thing, heavy with the ghost of what our family used to be. My revenge, I realized, was also my punishment. I was living in the bleak, lonely world I had created. The plan had been to let this play out for a few months, but I couldn't take it anymore. The loneliness was worse than before. The pain of seeing my children distorted by my lie was a constant ache deeper than any cardiac symptom. I decided to end it. I would call them, confess everything, and pray they could forgive me. But fate, it seemed, had one more card to play. I was at the grocery store, feeling every one of my 68 years, when I ran into Karen's college roommate, Stephanie. We made small talk, and then she said, "It's such a shame about Karen's deal falling through." I frowned. Deal? Yeah, the partner track at her firm. I heard from a friend that she was a shoo-in, but she needed to bring in a certain level of client investment. She was so close, but she told me last week she'd lost a major anchor client and it set her back. She seemed really stressed. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Karen had never mentioned any of this. She'd only talked about my finances. That evening, I called Brian's best friend, Miles, under the guise of asking about a computer issue. Casually, I asked how Brian's art was going. "Ah, man, he hasn't told you?" Miles said, his voice dropping. "He had to withdraw from the gallery show, the one he was so excited about. He said he needed to take on more freelance commercial work to help out with some family stuff. We were all devastated for him." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. This wasn't just about their reaction to me anymore. My lie was actively destroying their lives, their dreams. Karen was sacrificing her career ambitions. Brian was sacrificing his artistic soul. And they were doing it for a version of me that didn't exist, a helpless, bankrupt old man. The guilt was suffocating. But it was followed by a surge of clarity, of power. I didn't just want to confess. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to give them back what they had lost, but in a way they would never forget. The simple confession was no longer enough. The end of the lie had to be as dramatic as its beginning. I decided to use their own actions against them, to turn my confession into a lesson they would feel in their bones. I waited another 2 weeks, letting the pressure build. Karen called daily with more budgeting tips. Brian sent me links to online courses for seniors on reskilling. Then I set the stage. I told them I had a final important meeting with Mr. Albright to sign the papers for the sale of the family house. I asked them to meet me there one last time. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. The house was empty, most of our furniture already in storage. Echoes of our life here whispered in the empty rooms.
I set up a small table and 3 chairs in the middle of the vast living room. On the table, I placed a single, sealed manila envelope.
Karen arrived first, dressed for battle in a dark suit. She barely looked at me, her eyes scanning the room as if assessing its remaining value. "Let's get this over with, Dad. I have a conference call in an hour." Brian arrived soon after, looking tired. He gave me a weak smile. "Hey, Pops. Last time in the old place, huh?" We sat at the table. The emptiness of the house amplified every sound. "Where's Mr. Albright?" Karen asked, impatient. "He's not coming," I said quietly. "What do you mean? We're here to sign the papers." "There are no papers to sign," I said. I looked at each of them, my heart pounding, not from illness, but from adrenaline. This meeting isn't about the house. It's about the last 6 months. It's about the test. They stared at me, uncomprehending. "Test?" Brian echoed. "After my heart scare, I was afraid," I began, my voice growing stronger. "I was afraid that the money I'd spent my life building would be the only thing holding this family together. I was afraid that without it, we'd have nothing left. So I decided to find out. The heart condition was real. The fear was real. But the financial collapse, the depleted estate, that was a lie." The silence was absolute. Karen's face went from confusion to dawning horror. Brian just looked lost. You lied to us?" Karen whispered, her voice dangerously low. "Every penny is still there. The business, the investments, the life insurance, it's all intact. More than intact. It's grown. Mr. Albright is an actor." Karen shot to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. "You lied to us? For 6 months? Do you have any idea what you've put me through? I lost a partnership opportunity because I was so distracted by this disaster. I've been working night and day trying to salvage a situation that didn't even exist." Her anger was a physical force in the room. Brian remained seated, but his face had crumbled. You let me think I had to give up my show." He looked down at his hands. "Why, Dad? Why would you do that?" "I needed to see who you were without the money," I said, my own voice rising to meet Karen's fury. "And what did I see? Karen, I saw a daughter so obsessed with an inheritance that she forgot she had a father. You didn't ask about my health. You asked about my balance sheet. You treated me like an incompetent child you were stuck with." I turned to Brian, my voice softening with pain. "And you, son? I saw a loving heart, but I saw you ready to extinguish your own light because you felt obligated to care for me. You were going to throw away your talent out of pity. I never wanted that for you. I wanted you to be strong, to live your dreams, not to sacrifice them for me." I picked up the manila envelope and slid it across the table. "This is not a check. This is the truth. It's a summary of the actual estate, and it's also my new will." Karen stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. "Your will? What have you done now?" "I've had a lot of time to think," I said, "about what true value is. The estate will be placed into a trust. The distributions will not be based on bloodline, but on character." I looked directly at Karen.
The trust will provide a generous annual stipend to each of you, enough to live comfortably. But the bulk of the capital, the controlling shares of the business, will be released based on milestones, not financial milestones, human ones. I took a deep breath. For Brian, a portion will be released when he has a solo gallery showing of his original work, not for money, but for the act of creating and sharing his gift. Brian looked up, tears in his eyes. For Karen, I continued, my gaze unwavering, a portion will be released when she can provide me with a letter of recommendation from a colleague stating that she mentored them without expectation of reward. When she can demonstrate that her success is measured in more than just billable hours. Karen was speechless, her anger replaced by a stunned silence. The rest, I said, will be donated to a charity for aspiring artists and a fund for small business startups in your mother's name. This money will do some good in the world, the kind of good I'm not sure you two are capable of thinking about right now. The fallout was quiet. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic reconciliations. Karen left first, without a word, the unopened envelope tucked under her arm. Brian stayed for a while, just sitting in the silence of the empty house. It was a cruel thing to do, Dad. But I think I understand why. It took months, a year. Karen didn't speak to me for almost 3. But then a letter arrived. It wasn't from a colleague, it was from her. 10 pages, handwritten. It was full of anger and pain, but also of self-reflection. She wrote about the pressure she always felt to be the successful one, to justify the privilege we'd given her. She admitted that she had come to see me as an extension of that success. She was in therapy, she said. She was trying to understand who she was without the shadow of the inheritance looming over her. Brian slowly, tentatively started drawing again. He didn't do it for the money. He did it because, after the initial shock wore off, he realized how much he missed it. He showed me his sketchbook one day, and the passion was back, brighter than before.
They didn't become different people overnight, but the dynamic shifted. The money was no longer the unspoken third party in every conversation. When we talk now, it was about their lives, their struggles, their joys. It was real. The irony is, by pretending to take it all away, I gave us all a chance to earn something back. I gave them a chance to find their own footing, and I gave myself the one thing my money could never buy, the certainty that whatever love was left between us was real. It was scarred, and it was complicated, but it was real. And as for my revenge, it was perfectly proportionate. I didn't bankrupt them. I didn't disown them. I made them look in the mirror, and I made what they saw so uncomfortable that they had no choice but to change. I gave them a challenge far more difficult than any business problem, the challenge of becoming better people. And in doing so, I finally found a legacy for my wealth that felt worthy of Clara's memory. Not just an inheritance, but an inspiration. We all want to believe that our family's love is unconditional, but sometimes the conditions are invisible, woven into the fabric of our lives by expectation and privilege. It took a lie of monumental proportions to tear that fabric and see what was underneath. Was it a betrayal? Absolutely. But it was a betrayal that paved the way for a more honest relationship, however painful the path. So what do you think? Was my lie a necessary evil or a step too far? Could you ever forgive a parent for testing you like that? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever questioned the motives behind the love you receive, then do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about the difficult choices that define us, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, the truest test of character often come when we think no one is watching. Until next time.